On September 30th, 2026, Tennessee is scheduled to execute Christa Gale Pike. She will be 50 years old. She was 18 when she committed the crime that put her on death row. If the execution proceeds, Pike will become the first woman executed in Tennessee in more than 200 years. The last woman put to death in the state was Mary Langham, executed in the early 1800s, either 1807 or 1820, depending on which historical records you consult. That's how rare this is. Pike has been on death row for 30 years. Her case has been through every level of the courts. Appeals have been filed, denied, refiled, and denied again. Clemency petitions are possible but unlikely. The execution date is set. Before we go further, leave a comment. Tell us what state or country you're watching from and what you think about executing someone who was 18 at the time of the crime. These cases always bring debate, and we want to hear where you stand. This is the story of Christa Pike, the crime that brought her to death row, the victim whose life was taken, and the 30 years that have passed since. The crime: January 12, 1995, Knoxville, Tennessee. Colleen Slemmer was 19 years old, a student at the Knoxville Job Corps Center. She was there to finish her education and train to become a nursing assistant. She came from a difficult background, but she had plans. She wanted a better life. Christa Pike was also a student at the Job Corps Center. She was 18. She had been dating a young man named Tatterall Shipp. At some point, Pike became convinced that Slemmer was interested in Shipp, that she was trying to come between them. There's no evidence that Slemmer had any romantic involvement with Shipp, but Pike believed it. Pike decided to confront Slemmer. She recruited Shipp and another student, Shadala Peterson, to help. The plan was to lure Slemmer to an isolated area and attack her. On the evening of January 12th, Pike told Slemmer they were going for a walk. She said they needed to talk things out to clear the air. Slemmer agreed. She had no reason to suspect what was about to happen. They walked to a wooded area near the Job Corps Center, a place where students sometimes went to get away from campus. It was quiet. No one else was around. That's when Pike turned on her. What happened next lasted more than 30 minutes. Pike beat Slemmer repeatedly. She slashed her with a box cutter. She carved a pentagram into her chest. Slemmer tried to defend herself, but she was outnumbered. Shipp and Peterson were there. Shipp participated in the attack. Peterson watched. At some point, Pike picked up a piece of asphalt from the ground. She used it to strike Slemmer's skull multiple times. The medical examiner later testified that the blows were the cause of death. Slemmer's skull was fractured. She died in that clearing. After she was dead, Pike took a piece of Slemmer's skull. She kept it as a trophy. She showed it to other students back at the Job Corps Center, bragging about what she had done. That's how police found out. Someone reported it. Officers went to the scene and found Slemmer's body. Pike, Shipp, and Peterson were arrested the next day. Pike was 18 years old. Shipp was 17. Peterson was 18. All three were charged with first-degree murder. The victim, Colleen Slemmer, was from Florida. She had enrolled in Job Corps to escape a troubled home life and to gain skills that would help her support herself. Her mother, Deanna Christian, later described her as kind, hopeful, and determined. Slemmer wanted to work in healthcare. She wanted to help people. She never got the chance. She was 19 years old when she died. She had been at Job Corps for only a few months. Her mother has spoken publicly about the case over the years. She has attended court hearings. She has advocated for Pike's execution. When Pike was sentenced, Christian requested that the piece of Slemmer's skull that Pike had kept be returned so it could be buried with her daughter. That request was denied. Christian has said that the execution would bring closure, that it would finally allow her family to move forward after 30 years of waiting. She has described the pain of knowing that her daughter suffered for more than half an hour before she died, that she was conscious and aware during the attack, and that Pike took a piece of her body as a souvenir. Colleen Slemmer is the victim in this case. Whatever debate exists about Pike's sentence, about her age or her mental health or the fairness of the process, Slemmer's death is not in dispute. She was killed. The evidence is clear. The conviction is solid. The trial, Pike's trial began in March 1996 in Knox County Criminal Court. Judge Mary Beth Leibovitz presided. The prosecution presented evidence that included witness testimony from other Job Corps students, forensic evidence from the crime scene, and statements Pike made after her arrest. Pike did not deny being present. She did not deny participating in the attack. Her defense focused on her age and her mental state. Her attorneys argued that she was young, that she had been influenced by Shipp, and that she was not fully responsible for her actions. The jury did not accept that defense. On March 22, 1996, Pike was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial moved to the penalty phase, where the jury had to decide whether she should receive life in prison or death. The prosecution argued that the crime was especially heinous. They presented evidence of the torture Slemmer endured, the length of the attack, and the fact that Pike kept a piece of her skull. They argued that Pike showed no remorse, that she had bragged about the killing, and that she posed a continuing threat. The defense presented mitigating evidence. They argued that Pike was 18, that she had a troubled childhood, and that she suffered from mental health issues. They did not present extensive testimony about her background, a decision that would later become a major focus of her appeals. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous recommendation for death. On March 30, 1996, Judge Leibovitz sentenced Pike to death by electrocution. She also imposed a 25-year sentence for the conspiracy conviction. Pike became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. At the time, Tennessee used the electric chair. That method was later replaced by lethal injection, but inmates sentenced before 1999 retain the option to choose electrocution. Pike has not publicly stated which method she will choose if the execution proceeds. The co-defendants. Tatterall Shipp was 17 at the time of the crime. Because of his age, he was not eligible for the death penalty. He was tried as an adult and convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. Shipp became eligible for parole in 2026. His status is not widely reported, but he has not been released as of the time this script was prepared. Shadala Peterson was 18. She did not participate directly in the attack, but she was present and did nothing to stop it. She was charged as an accomplice. Peterson cooperated with prosecutors. She testified against Pike and Shipp in exchange for a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. She was sentenced to probation. Peterson served no prison time. She completed her probation and has not been in the public eye since. The disparity between her sentence and Pike's has been cited by Pike's defense attorneys as evidence of unfairness, but courts have ruled that Peterson's limited involvement justified the lesser sentence. The fact that Pike received death while Shipp received life has also been a focus of appeals. Pike's attorneys have argued that gender bias played a role, that women who commit violent crimes are judged more harshly than men, especially when the violence is seen as outside traditional gender norms. Courts have rejected that argument. 30 years on death row. Pike has been on Tennessee's death row since 1996. For most of that time, she was held in solitary confinement at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center, formerly known as the Tennessee Prison for Women. Solitary confinement means isolation. Pike spent 23 hours a day in a cell by herself. She had limited contact with other inmates, limited access to programs, and minimal interaction with staff. She was allowed 1 hour of recreation per day in a small yard. She could receive mail and have visits, but those were restricted. In 2024, Pike reached a settlement with the state. The lawsuit challenged the conditions of her confinement, arguing that 28 years in solitary constituted cruel and unusual punishment. The state agreed to move her to a less restrictive environment. She is no longer in solitary, but she remains on death row. Pike's appeals have been extensive. Her direct appeal was denied by the Tennessee Supreme Court in 1998. She filed for post-conviction relief, arguing that her trial attorneys were ineffective because they did not present enough evidence about her mental health and her childhood. That motion was denied in 2001 and affirmed by the state Supreme Court in 2004. She filed a federal habeas corpus petition, making many of the same arguments. That petition was denied in 2004. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the denial in 2019. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case. At one point, Pike attempted to drop her appeals. In 2001, she filed a motion asking the courts to proceed with her execution. A stay was granted while her mental competency to make that decision was evaluated. By 2002, she had changed her mind and resumed fighting the sentence. In 2023, her attorneys filed a motion to reopen her case based on State v. Booker, a Tennessee Supreme Court decision that addressed sentencing for juveniles. Pike's attorneys argued that the principles in Booker, which recognized that young offenders have less culpability and greater capacity for rehabilitation, should apply to her because she was 18 at the time of the crime. The court ruled that Booker applied only to juveniles under 18, not young adults. The motion was denied. Pike also made headlines in 2012 when a plot to help her escape from prison was uncovered. The plan involved outside accomplices and was discovered before it could be carried out. Pike was not charged in connection with the plot, but it drew attention to her case and raised concerns about security on death row. All major appeals have been exhausted. Pike's legal team can still file for clemency, but Tennessee's Board of Parole rarely grants clemency in death penalty cases. Governor's reprieves are also rare. The execution is scheduled to proceed. The controversies. Pike's case has drawn attention for several reasons. One is her age. She was 18 when she committed the crime. Brain development research has shown that the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and decision-making, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. Pike's attorneys have argued that sentencing her to death at 18 was disproportionate, that she should have been treated more like a juvenile than an adult. Courts have rejected that argument. The law draws the line at 18. Pike was legally an adult. The Supreme Court has ruled that the death penalty cannot be imposed on offenders who were under 18 at the time of the crime, but it has not extended that protection to young adults. Another issue is her mental health. Pike's attorneys have argued that she suffered from bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and brain damage. They say that these conditions were not adequately explored during her trial, and that if the jury had heard more about her mental health, they might have chosen life in prison instead of death. Pike's childhood was marked by neglect and abuse. She was born prematurely. Her mother was a drug addict. Pike was sexually abused as a child. She attempted suicide multiple times starting at age 12. She was involved in the occult and identified with Wicca, which prosecutors used to paint her as dangerous during the trial. Her defense team did present some of this information, but not in great detail. The Ineffective Counsel Claims center on the argument that her attorneys did not do enough to humanize her, that they did not bring in expert witnesses to explain how her childhood and her mental health affected her behavior. Courts have reviewed those claims and found that Pike's trial attorneys made strategic decisions, that they presented a defense, and that the outcome was not the result of incompetence. The conviction and sentence have been upheld. Gender is another factor. Women make up a small fraction of death row inmates in the United States. As of 2025, fewer than 60 women are on death row nationwide, compared to more than 2,000 men. Women who commit violent crimes, especially murders that involve torture or extreme brutality, are often judged more harshly than men who commit similar crimes. Pike's case has been cited as an example of that bias. Her attorneys have argued that the jury's decision was influenced by the fact that Pike was a young woman who acted in ways that violated societal expectations. They say that if she had been a man, the outcome might have been different. Courts have not found sufficient evidence to support that claim. The solitary confinement issue is also significant. Pike spent 28 years in isolation. Human rights organizations have argued that prolonged solitary confinement constitutes torture, that it causes psychological harm, and that it should not be imposed on death row inmates. Pike's lawsuit resulted in a settlement, but the state did not admit wrongdoing. She is no longer in solitary, but the years she spent there cannot be undone. Tennessee's history. Tennessee has not executed a woman since the early 1800s. The last execution was Mary Langham, though records from that time are incomplete and conflicting. Some sources say 1807, Others say 1820. What is clear is that it has been more than 200 years. The state has executed men during that time, but not frequently. Tennessee's use of the death penalty has been sporadic. There were periods of high activity, periods of moratorium, and periods where the process simply stalled due to legal challenges or drug shortages. In recent years, Tennessee has resumed executions. The state carried out 2 in 2025 and 1 in 2024. A new lethal injection protocol was implemented in 2025, replacing an earlier method that had been challenged in court. The current protocol uses a single drug, pentobarbital, which is also used in several other states. Tennessee allows inmates sentenced before 1999 to choose between lethal injection and electrocution. Pike qualifies for that choice. If she chooses electrocution, she would be the first person executed by that method in Tennessee since 2007. If she chooses lethal injection, she will be executed using the new protocol. The state has only one woman on death row. That woman is Christa Pike. If her execution is carried out, Tennessee will no longer have any women awaiting execution. The execution. Pike's execution is scheduled for September 30th, 2026, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Executions in Tennessee typically begin at 10 o'clock in the morning. The process, from the time the inmate enters the execution chamber to the time of death, usually takes 15 to 20 minutes. Pike will be notified of the method to be used no later than August 28, 2026, 33 days before the execution. If she does not make a choice, the state will use lethal injection by default. Witnesses will include representatives from the victim's family, media members, and Pike's spiritual advisor if she requests one. Tennessee law allows up to 6 representatives from the victim's family to attend. The inmate is also allowed to make a final statement, which can last up to 2 minutes. Pike has not made any public statements about her final words. If she chooses to speak, those words will be recorded and released to the media shortly after the execution. The execution will be carried out by trained personnel. The drugs used in lethal injection are sourced through suppliers protected by state secrecy laws. Tennessee, like many other states, does not disclose where it obtains pentobarbital or how much it pays. That secrecy has been the subject of lawsuits, but courts have upheld the state's right to protect supplier identities. If Pike chooses electrocution, the process is different. She would be strapped into the electric chair. Electrodes would be attached to her head and leg. A current would be applied in cycles until she is pronounced dead. The method is considered more visually disturbing than lethal injection, which is one reason most states have moved away from it. Tennessee still offers it as an option for inmates sentenced before the switch to lethal injection was made. Pike's execution will be Tennessee's first of a woman in over 2 centuries. It will also be one of the few executions of a woman anywhere in the United States in recent years. The case will draw national and international attention. What it means: Christa Pike has been on death row for 30 years. She was 18 when she committed the crime. She will be 50 when she is executed, if the execution proceeds. The legal process has run its course. The courts have reviewed her case at every level. The appeals have been exhausted. Clemency is possible but unlikely. The execution date is set. Colleen Slemmer was 19 when she died. She was beaten and tortured for more than 30 minutes. Her family has waited 30 years for this day. Whether that wait constitutes justice or something else depends on where you stand on the death penalty, on youth sentencing, on mental health, and on how much weight you give to the brutality of the crime versus the circumstances of the person who committed it. Pike will be the first woman executed in Tennessee in more than 200 years. That fact alone makes this case historic. But the significance goes beyond the numbers. It raises questions about how we treat young offenders, how we account for mental illness and childhood trauma, and whether the death penalty serves the purpose it's meant to serve. Slemmer's family will be there. Pike's legal team will continue to argue that the execution should not proceed. The state will carry out the sentence unless a court intervenes or the governor grants a reprieve. Neither is expected. September 30th, 2026. Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. 10 o'clock in the morning. Christa Pike will be executed for the murder of Colleen Slemmer. The case will close. The debate will not. If you want updates as the execution date approaches, subscribe. We'll keep you informed. Thanks for watching.